Fly-by-wire. It invokes images of fast-flying ultra-modern fighter aircraft with unbelievably complicated electronics, making them able to perform all sorts of unimaginable maneuvers. But the roots of fly-by-wire trace back to the early 20th century, and in World War II Germany worked on a high-performance bomber that was fitted with an early version of a fly-by-wire system. This fascinating aircraft is a truly forgotten one, an aircraft with a lot of potential, overcome by the complexity of its electronics, the failure of the engine that was intended to power it, and the omnipresent political infighting in Nazi Germany. This is the story of the Focke Wulf Fw-191, Germany's forgotten fly-by-wire bomber. And in order to give you a full overview over the Fw-191, we first need to talk about the Bomba B Program. The pre-war developments of the Luftwaffe into bomber aircraft, often done in secret, had provided them with a number of useful tactical bombers. These types would prove successful in the early battles of World War II, where types like the Heinkel 111, Dornier 17, and most importantly the Junkers 88 had impressively demonstrated the concept of the Schnellbomber, fast-flying bombers with light defensive armaments and rather light bomb loads, using their speed to evade enemy interceptors. However, even by the start of World War II, some of these machines were already becoming superseded in their capabilities by foreign aircraft. The Heinkel 111 was a civilian aircraft when it was first introduced and only had limited development potential due to size restrictions of its small bomb bay. The Dornier 17 likewise carried too light of a bomb load, and the Junkers 88 was just entering service. This trio of bombers, augmented by the Junkers 87 Stuka dive bomber, formed the core of the German bomber force. And with all three of the medium types serving more or less the same role, the Luftwaffe looked into replacing all of these types with a new modern design, thereby providing the Luftwaffe with a capable medium bomber, while also having less types of aircraft in production for one role. This project was called Bomba B, while development of a strategic long-range bomber ran under the name Bomber A, resulting in the ill-fated Heinkel 177. Bomba B was started just prior to World War II in 1939. The requirements for the new aircraft were indeed quite formidable. It would follow in the steps of the concept of the Schnellbomber, but with significant increases in terms of speed, payload, range and armament. The aircraft, according to specifications sent out by the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, were as follows: a top speed of 600 km per hour, bomb load of 4 tons with 6 tons max on short-range flights, a pressurized cockpit for high-altitude missions, and the ability to strike Great Britain from bases in Norway or France. The defensive armament was to be powered remotely, and the aircraft was to be able to dive bomb. The companies responding to this very demanding set of specifications were Arado, Junkers, Focke Wulf, and Dornier. Arado's E340 project was the most unusual and was rather quickly dropped because of its complexity. The Dornier 317 was a further development of the upcoming Dornier 217, and while straightforward was not as promising as the other designs, with ultimately only a single one being built. Junkers entered the stunningly beautiful Junkers 288, and it was this that was from the get-go the fan favorite and would be the one undergoing the most development. However, Focke Wulf's entry, designated Fw-191, had caught the Air Ministry's attention as well, and it too would be given a development contract. It was designed by a team led by diplom engineer Erhard Kosel. Kosel was an experienced engineer, having worked on the Fw-189 Uhu reconnaissance aircraft and the prototype Fw-186 autogyro. The design team came up with a clean, sleek, and at least outwardly conventional-looking machine, with a shoulder-mounted wing, stepless cockpit, and twin-tail configuration. The aircraft had a wingspan of 25 meters, was 18.5 meters long, with a weight of roughly 20 tons. Ceiling was at 9.7 kilometers of altitude. It's really at the inside, however, where the Fw-191 shows its uniqueness. The four-man crew was housed in a pressurized cockpit. An unusual quirk was that the entire crew had to get into the cockpit from the bomb bay via a ladder. The crew were all sat in the front of the aircraft, a concept known in Germany as the Kampfkopf. This made pressurization of the aircraft, of course, much easier. The fully glazed, stepless cockpit of the 191 allowed for excellent visibility, and the pilot was provided with an armored seat. The aircraft was fitted with remotely controlled gun turrets in dorsal, ventral, chin, and most interestingly, rear engine nacelle mounts. These would house the bomber's defensive armaments in the form of 20mm cannons and MG-81s. To make the aircraft able to operate at high altitudes, a de-icing system was fitted, using hot exhaust gases vented through channels in the wingtips, while the empennage would be heated and de-iced by a heat generator called Kercherofen. This would also keep all the systems in the back of the aircraft warm and cozy to prevent them from freezing up during high-altitude operations. The large bomb bay had 3 attachment units that could house a variety of bombs with the biggest possible load, being 6 SD or PC-1000 bombs, 4 in the bomb bay and 2 in underwing mounts. The biggest bomb that could be fitted was the PC-1700. A total of 3 of these bombs could be carried, 1 in the bomb bay and 2 on the wing pylons. Positioned above the bomb bay were the main fuel tanks, while 2 additional ones were placed in the inboard wings. As the aircraft was also intended to be used as a long-range reconnaissance aircraft, provisions were also made for the aircraft to be equipped with the RB5030 and RB2030 cameras, with the latter being also able to be replaced by the RB7530. Another unique feature of the 191 was the fitment of a so-called Multop-Klappe. Named after its designer and Focke Wulf worker Hans Multop, this special device was a combined dive and landing flap. I couldn't find very much on how exactly it operates, but from the few articles and pictures, this very interesting system basically is a split flap with a lower and upper part. The lower part would fit snugly into the upper one, reducing drag in flight. When deployed in a dive, the lower dive part of the flap would move downwards, while the upper part would raise, creating a large combined dive brake. When deployed for landing, the entire system would droop down. The insistence of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium to make this aircraft capable of dive bombing really shows Germany's obsession with this sort of tactic. This would lead to further problems down the line and further complicate the development of the already very demanding Bomba B program, as well as causing significant trouble for the Bomber A program. It was clear from the get-go that the aircraft would live and die by the fitment of the right engine. The aircrafts of the Bomber B program would require engines of the 2000 horsepower class to achieve their design speeds. The engine that was to power these aircraft was the promising UMO 222. While a number of engines were considered for the project, the 222 showed the most potential. This engine and its history are probably worthy of a video of their own, so I will keep it rather short in this entry. The 222 is a very unique engine. It's basically a 24-cylinder, water-cooled multi-bank engine with 6 cylinder banks mounted at a 60-degree angle towards each other, creating a hexagonal shape. While it is water-cooled, it is actually more of a radial engine in appearance. It first ran in March of 1938, and so great was its development potential in the eyes of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium that basically all Bomber B entries chose this power plant from the get-go. However, Focke Wulf was prudent and also considered fitting the Daimler-Benz 603. While delivering less power, the 603 was less complex and could be obtained cheaper than the 222. It would also be ready much earlier than the 222. Focke Wulf actually pushed for incorporating the 603 into the 191 program, but these plans ultimately were cancelled for unknown reasons. But Stuka, I hear you here. This all sounds very interesting, but what about the fly-by-wire aspect of the aircraft? Glad you asked. Well, the 191's fly-by-wire system is not a fly-by-wire as we know it today. You see, per definition, it just means having electric flight controls instead of manual ones. In today's world, this means the flight controls are augmented by computers and electrical systems that allow modern fighter jets, for example, to be highly maneuverable and easy to fly. Likewise, long-range airliners are able to cruise for hours with the pilot not having to do anything. Some airliners are even able to land fully autonomous. Of course, the fly-by-wire system of the 191 is much less complex, but it's still a novelty at that time. You see, in most aircraft of the day, flight controls were either operated manually with pulleys and cables, or were augmented on larger aircraft by hydraulic systems. Instead of these, the 191 was to be powered fully by electrical units. This ran from the flight controls up to the armament. Everything was to be powered by electric motors. While such experiments had been undertaken already in the 1920s with the arent-20, a Soviet plane, the electric flight controls of the 191 were on a completely other level. When talking about German efforts in electrically powered flight controls, we need to include a man by the name of Karl Otto Altvater. Altvater was the leader of the aircraft electric department of the Siemens company. He and his subordinates filed several patents during the 1930s for groundbreaking achievements in electric flight controls. This included a system that would automatically recover an aircraft from a dive. The 191 was to be fitted with such a system that would automatically activate the aircraft's elevator trim tabs to such a degree that 3.5 G was not to be exceeded. The wiring on board the 191 was extensive. According to the magazine Klassiker der Luftfahrt, around 8,000 spring-loaded connectors and 3,000 plugs could be found inside the aircraft. 60% of the assembly time would be caused by replacing all the electrical systems alone, and it would be this complex system of electrics that would cause all sorts of trouble down the line. To power this electric system, 4 generators were fitted, each providing 3,000 watts of power. These were housed in the engine nacelles of the machine. The electric system ran on 24 volts, and it was this that led to the aircraft jokingly being called das fliegende Kraftwerk, the flying power station. To test all the various systems and aspects of the 191, no less than 10 V-Muster test airframes were to be built, the first of which, V1, was ready by the 18th of March 1941. Due to delays in UMO 222 procurement, V1 was fitted with a pair of BMW 801 air-cooled radials of some 1500 horsepower. With Unteroffizier Kurt Mehlhorn at the controls, V1 took to the skies that same day. Problems were immediately noted as the aircraft was severely underpowered with the 801 engines. Further developments arose with the aircraft's landing flap system and particularly with the electrics of the aircraft. The second prototype, V2, was available only in January the following year, also with BMW 801 radials, and displayed the same problems. Biggest problem in the electrical system of the 191 were the so-called Michelstecker, Michel plugs. These plugs led to countless electrical issues, and with so many of them installed, finding the faulty unit was understandably a nightmare. Indeed, the maintenance crews were not really fond of the bird. Focke Wulf eagerly sought solutions. Further prototypes were to have more simplified electrics with clamps distributing the electric current instead of the Michelsteckers, while the existing prototypes were to be rewired. These actions led to further significant delays. However, an even greater issue was the UMO 222, or the lack of it. Continued problems with the UMO led to Focke Wulf searching for alternatives as early as August 1941. While at first the DB601 or 605 was considered, the UMO 211 was ultimately chosen. This is understandable as the UMO 211 had already established itself as the go-to bomber engine for the Luftwaffe, being used in the Heinkel 111, Junkers 87 and Junkers 88, while the Daimler-Benz engines were generally reserved for fighter production. Focke Wulf studied the use of 4 UMO 211Fs to create the 191C. Because of the additional weight of 2 engines and their mounts, payload and fuel capacity had to be reduced, resulting in a range drop from 5,200 km to just 3,700 km. The testing of V1 and V2 led to further design changes in the 4-engined 191C. The troublesome electric system, dive bombing capability, and the electrically controlled flight surfaces were all cut, basically removing all the innovative features the 191 had to offer. The new aircraft was designated Focke Wulf Fw-191 and its design was ready in July of 1942. To make it as easy as possible to get it into production, the 491 used as many components from the 191 as possible, and the engines were now the same as those in the Junkers Ju-88, but ultimately all this would amount to nothing as the development of the 4-engined 191 was stopped in June of 1942. Only the prototypes then under construction for the 191 program were to be completed, putting the entire 191 program in jeopardy. In the meantime, another prototype was nearing flight testing, V3. Sources seem to differ if V3 was ever completed, but the magazine Flugzeug Classic details the history of the third prototype rather extensively, leading at least me to believe that V3 was actually completed. It was the first prototype to receive the troublesome UMO 222 engines. However, their experimental nature soon showed itself. Intended to first fly in August of 42, the engines fitted to the aircraft had to be returned to the manufacturer because of pressure build-up and cooling issues. Further attempted first flights had to be delayed due to an engine fire and an Allied air raid, which was followed by a malfunction of the flaps leading to wing damage. After a new UMO 222 was fitted, it promptly destroyed itself, damaging the aircraft severely, so severely in fact that it was to be only used in ground tests. However, after the UMO engines failed again, all work on V3 was abandoned. A short glimmer of hope was the fourth prototype, V6, which also fitted with UMO engines, was able to perform its first flight in December of 1942 after overcoming some initial cooling and evaporation problems with the engines. Flown by Focke Wulf's chief test pilot Hans Sander, the bomber displayed good performance. V6 also did away with the complex pure electrical powered flap controls, instead replacing them with an electro-hydraulic system. This showed marked improvements in the reliability of the offset system. However, time was on the clock for the 191 at this point. The aircraft was seriously delayed, and it still would take a lot of time before the aircraft was ready. In any case, it only played the second fiddle to the Junkers 288 anyways, and therefore all work on the Focke Wulf 191 was stopped in the spring of 1943. V1 and V2 were scrapped, while V6 would continue as an engine testbed for the 222 engines and for further modifications like ejection seats and the like. In this role, V6 soldiered on until at least the end of 1943. Work was to concentrate on the Junkers 288, but that aircraft would ultimately fail as well, mainly due to the unavailability and failure of the Junkers UMO 222. The failure of the 222 can be traced to its complex design, cooling and crankshaft issues together with bickering and infighting over which engine to produce, which led to further delays into ironing out the 222's issues until a point was reached where the engine just wasn't needed anymore and subsequently cancelled altogether. Projects like in the 288 to replace the UMOs with the two-piece DB606 or 610 were pretty early thrown out due to the unreliability and weight of these couple-powered systems. In any case, the war had gone sour for the Germans at this point, and fighters were prioritized, leading to the cancellation of the entire Bomba B program. This meant that the Germans had to soldier on with outdated types like the Heinkel 111 and Junkers 88, and while more capable versions of these aircraft, as well as further developments like the Dornier 217 and Junkers 188 offered better performance than their previous types, they did not have the performance and design specs the Bomba B aircraft displayed, and were in any case available in rather low numbers, therefore limiting Germany to a mostly outdated bomber fleet. And that brings the history of the Focke Wulf 191 to an end. Truly an aircraft with a lot of potential, but it just wasn't to be. I really hope you enjoyed this entry in my historic overviews of aircraft. This really is one of the more forgotten machines, but a machine I actually have known for quite a lot of time. I was reading a lot of magazines back in my childhood, and the 191 was in the first magazine I ever owned. And from this point, it always fascinated me. It really is an aircraft that isn't really talked about as much, even though it is a very interesting aircraft. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, maybe even learned something, and I will see you in the next one.